In my view, this is the biggest gift that the Chinese government has given to the world and to the United States.
Welcome to the CryptoCounsel at Wiley. We are the podcast that decodes the most important crypto disputes in law and regulation. I'm Josh, an international lawyer who does crypto.
And I'm Frank, a finance and technology litigator who also does crypto.
I am delighted to have as our guest on the CryptoCounsel today, Andrey Krahmal, who's the head of legal at Peak Mining, a pioneering crypto industry company, and lots of interesting insights about energy use, law and regulation, and the future of crypto. Welcome, Andrey.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Tell me how you got into crypto. What was your path?
It's been a long road. It's sort of crypto native. I've been playing in the space for a while and invested early in Bitcoin. I think it's an amazing technology that holds so much promise. And I've been in the energy space for a while. I worked for one of the largest renewables developer in the United States before in legal capacity. And I've recently joined mining as head of legal. And it's one of the top Bitcoin mining companies globally. Our facilities provide a large portion of the global hash rate that's produced by everybody to support this wonderful ecosystem and infrastructure that stands behind Bitcoin and ensures that the Bitcoin ledger is immutable and is not prone to sort of security attacks and things of that nature. I've been with Peak Mining for 3-4 months. It's been an absolute whirlwind. We're in the process of doing a lot of amazing things, which I can dive into later on, but we're essentially in the business of owning and operating Bitcoin mining facilities, mostly in the United States, mostly southeastern United States, Texas, North Dakota, Georgia. We have operations also in Canada. We have hosted facilities with other providers in Paraguay, of all places. And these are large industrial strength sort of facilities that are up to 300, sometimes 600 megawatts in power usage, and they're extremely large. They run and consume a fair amount of electricity, and they run pretty loud and pretty hot, and so they require these massive cooling facilities, etc. And so we're in the process of essentially building these sites and deploying them, energizing them, and then mining, producing hash rate and selling it to a mining pool and getting compensated for doing that. But essentially, it's a real estate development plus business of turning energy into money, into crypto. In our case, we're actually getting compensating for producing hash rate.
That's fantastic. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm looking forward to it. But I want to go back to something you said early on. You said that you got into Bitcoin early, and one of the questions for me as we unpack this Bitcoin space is, who is Satoshi Nakamoto? So I need to know, are you Satoshi Nakamoto?
I wish I'm not. I will put it on the record out there, Your Honor. I swear to say the truth, but nothing but the truth. And no, I'm not. We don't know who this is. It's an interesting, almost mythological figure in Bitcoin community. I don't think it really matters at the end of the day, and I don't quite understand why that person decided to become anonymous. And my guess is the amount of Bitcoin that person holds is significant, and that they are probably extremely wealthy as a result. And so they probably chose to sort of remain in the shadows and sort of spend their money quietly. That's my guess, but I don't know the answer.
Well, I think it's impressive if that's all true, and that is what most people think. I think it's impressive that someone could keep that much wealth hidden, but we continue to benefit from what he brought to the world. And you mentioned that Peak Mining is a pioneer in this space. The company's been around for a while. Tell us about, what is it doing differently? How is it leading in Bitcoin mining?
Yeah, the company has been around for 12 years or so, which in Bitcoin sort of historical terms, that means we probably have been through 3 or so halving. And to just give you a bit of a background, halving is a mathematically predetermined process whereby the reward for mining Bitcoin and solving these cryptographical sort of challenges is going down and gets reduced by 50% every 4 years. So after a predetermined number of blocks gets mined. And so the industry essentially is in this arms race of having to become more and more efficient and more streamlined at how it does things. And so the days of Bitcoin pioneers mining Bitcoin on their laptops or their PCs in the basement somewhere. These days are long gone because the amount of hash rate that these units will be producing and are capable of producing is just nowhere near comparable to what these new ASIC miners are capable of doing. And essentially, the new generation of these ASIC miners, they're very simple machines, not so simple in some sense, but they are designed to do one thing and one thing only and do it very well. And essentially, they're there to mine Bitcoin as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And we buy lots of them and we operate them. And it's basically like any data center, except it's a specialized data center kind of operation. We used to collocate our facilities with other providers. We used to use hosting services, etc. That is changing. And the industry, we had a halving event earlier this year where the reward for mining has reduced again by 50%. And essentially the industry goes through the cycle where they realize, oh my God, these facilities are no longer profitable or cost effective, and therefore everybody scrambles and sort of iterates. And what inevitably is starting to happen is that the industry is getting a lot more scale. It gets professionalized. You start thinking in, multiples, hundreds of megawatt type facilities. They're large, they're industrial grade. You need to procure a lot of equipment. You need to run it like any sort of data center. Two salient difference about Bitcoin mining and data centers there are that it doesn't require a lot of high quality fiber connection. So we can be very rural. We can be in the middle of nowhere. As long as we have cheap land.
I'm curious because I think a lot of people know intuitively, or at least they've learned that these facilities are not in urban centers, right? They tend to be removed. They're out in the country. Why is it that they don't need that connectivity?
So if you think about cloud computing and you're in the process of watching a YouTube video at 2:00 in the morning, right? You want low latency and you want responsiveness and you want that video to be available right away and to start loading, and you want it to happen as fast as possible. With Bitcoin, it's not as important to have low latency because what happens is you get the problem, you download it, you hash it, and you spit out a solution. And this is just mathematics. It's text, right? It's numbers. It's not high volume of data that gets transferred back and forth. As a matter of fact, our backup facilities operate in Starlink internet, right? So backup internet, Starlink, and this regular business sort of fiber. So it's like AT&T small business fiber connection is good enough for us. We don't need the things that cloud processing facilities or these AI data centers need, which means we can be located in very rural communities where the land is cheap and the electricity is abundant.
That's fascinating. But there's one thing that you do need. And so a lot of this trend that you talked about, the scale, the professionalism, is energy. And that's where are there particular challenges in different rural areas? How do you go about assessing mining energy? Because that's what the ASIC miners need, right?
So our business development guys look at the sites, they look at the facilities, and we do run the numbers, right? So we assume volatility in the back end. We assume that the Bitcoin price and the reward is going to be volatile to some extent. We sort of say we price in profitability at a certain level. But what we do on the front end is our input. Essentially, it's land, equipment, which is fixed cost, land, which is fixed cost, and the only variable cost is electricity. And so we go to areas where we can get energy in time for when we want these facilities online. So interconnection needs to be in place, and you have, power contracts with local utilities. And that essentially drives 90% of where these facilities will be located. Now, we also look at binary risks, right? We say, okay, are we in a municipality that's going to outlaw this? Are we going to be ruled out of existence? Are we in the state that potentially is going to have a crypto ban? So these things, these tail risks, we have to take into account, and they become too fat, right? Then you just essentially, that impacts how you price that project. In outside of the United States, you also have to price in country risk. And in Paraguay, we're facing a situation where the local monopolies raised its electricity prices without notice by 16%. And sort of use that and have to decide what are we doing? How does it impact our project economics? What can we do about it? How do we respond to that, right? In the US, it's a bit of a more of an orderly process where you look at the utilities, they have to go through the process before they can raise their rates. There's some sort of due process involved, right? And we do run electricity intensively, right? These are machines that are essentially turning electricity into hash rate. They run very hot, so they need to be cooled, and they run pretty loud. So you can't walk into that thing and not have 2 layers of hearing protection. So these things are insane, right? You walk in, it's like a beehive on steroids. And
one of the technologies I've heard about is this liquid cooling. In fact, that there are some facilities now where the miners are completely submerged. Is that happening with your facilities? Is that the trend?
There's some sort of Bitcoin miners that are using that technology. We've looked at it. We do not have facilities that are liquid cooled yet. We're definitely looking at a lot of these things. The liquid cooled ones usually run a little bit quieter. It's exciting. There's a lot of exciting things that are happening. Ours are air cooled. Essentially, you have these massive numbers of these industrial strength, well, let's call them AC cooling units. They're like massive ACs. You see it on the roofs of the buildings, but we have like 8 or 10 of these on the side of the building with pipes going into the building, collecting heat, and then recycling it. And it's a closed loop system. I've seen concerns raised around water usage. The water usage is not that high. It's actually specialized cooling liquid that means it's closed loop and it doesn't go anywhere. So we sort of fill them in. They just operate for the life of the thing.
Interesting. You mentioned the project in Paraguay, which I think is fascinating because as I was looking into some of the commentary or the history of developments in the country earlier, I think just this year, I mean, even within the government, they're talking about, do we ban Bitcoin mining in the country? And then there's a kind of a complete pivot. And then they say, no, there's a lot of value here. And now Peak Mining is one of the companies that is investing there. Tell me about why Paraguay? Why is that the spot?
And it's the cost of energy. So they have this hydroelectric facility in Paraguay, and they generate a lot of electricity, and they sell it to Argentina and Brazil, and they also use it themselves. But the country is basically overproducing energy, and so the cost of energy is fairly low, and therefore it allows us to sort of say, hey, we will buy top dollar, as far as you're concerned, for this energy. And it's green energy, it's hydro, right? Sustainable green energy, and we'll take it from you and we'll mine Bitcoin and essentially create jobs on the ground. There's a lot of construction jobs. There's a lot of people who need to service this equipment and et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, the country did have a sort of turnaround in terms of their attitude for crypto mining. And now it's complete adoption, and they're very happy to sort of invite these new technologies into their country and to be on the forefront of all this stuff. The other thing you have to remember, a lot of this equipment, as I discussed, right, the industry is going every 4 years, there's a halving process. And also what happens is that the technology and the ASIC miners, they get better and better. So essentially after 2 years or so, these ASIC miners, they are just completely useless, right? I mean, they have very little value of 2 or 3 years, and they have to be completely replaced. So you have this data center, all the equipment gets stripped down, and you put all new miners, et cetera, et cetera.
I think we'll probably know this, but explain briefly what the halving is, but in particular, why is it that is affecting the life of the ASIC miners?
Right. So the halving is this pre-built mechanism where there's a limited number of Bitcoin that's going to be mined in the preset manner. And so you have a cutoff date where there's no more Bitcoin that's going to be mined, and you're going to have some transaction-related fees, but the miners will be able to get. But in terms of mining, that's going to go away. But the beauty of the system is there's this beautiful sort of curve. It's been pre-baked mathematically from day one. And basically, it's incentivizing people to come into the industry, but also incentivizes them to be as efficient, as proficient, and as professionalized as possible, essentially, because you have to have a horizon and you have to think, okay, how do we make use of these units that are 4 years old, are going to last for 4 years, how do we use them economically, make money, even though the rewards for participating and solving these crypto problems and supporting the network, the rewards are probably going to get reduced every 4 years or so, right? And so that's the beauty of the system. It's pure mathematics in its most distilled form, and it's doing a beautiful thing because it just aligns the incentives and ensures not only the survival of the system, but also its eventual evolution and just scaling. And it ensures that there will be miners always interested in participating in the system. But it's also a dynamic market where as more hash rate is brought online, the reward is automatically reduced. If it's reduced all of a sudden, the reward goes up, right? So it's almost like a free market system with beautiful mathematics behind it that ensures this evolution in how the system works. The detractors would say, hey, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? This is a waste of resources. Why are we wasting this electricity? But fundamentally, it's sort of a proof of work system, right? Where because we're using electricity, what gets produced as a result is the distillation of the spending of this electricity. And then when people say, well, what is Bitcoin? Well, it's actually something that's tangible that's become intangible. And the way I compare it to it's what is the US dollar? Well, it's actually a piece of paper issued by the Fed that says, to the bearer, this will be $10. And you say, well, okay, Fed, what can I do with these $10? And they'll should go to the window there. I don't know if they have one. And you say, like, what can I get for it? Well, nothing except for 10 $1 bills or a bunch of quarters. There's nothing fundamentally backing it aside from the promise of the federal government. And there's been a lot going on that the federal government has been doing in terms of quantitative easing and other related things where you sort of start questioning the fidelity of that system. Here, this is pure mathematics and free market, right? It's this alternative to fiat that is programmatic. It's transparent. You can see every Bitcoin that's been ever spent or transferred from day one. And you can track it and trace it. You cannot do that with any other currency out there. And so it's a thing of beauty, and the future is uncertain as to what it's going to become. But I definitely think that it holds so much promise because it's this new technology, and we're still kind of figuring out what is the use case for it. It's sort of like the early internet, right? Where we had GeoCities and we had Lycos and we had pets.com, and sort of everybody was looking at it and saying, like, what is this? A bunch of cities, what are they doing?
Like Amazon.
What are they doing? Right. And then sort of you see what it's become when it got professionalized, industrialized. These become real businesses with real business models. And nobody could have predicted Facebook or Instagram or TikTok before there was a cell phone. And nobody could have predicted the smartphone really in the shape that we have it, completely connected to the internet, having this compute in the palm of your hand, doing these amazing things in the 90s, right? Like we couldn't have said, well, that's what it's going to be. And then the evolution, sort of when you're in it, you don't really see the incremental change. But if you look back 20, 30 years, right, maybe 40 now, you sort of see that the seeds were there, and there was a bunch of enthusiasts and people who were just sort of proselytizing this thing and saying internet is the future. And now internet has become the present, right? And I think crypto has that potential. Whether that's going to play out, how that's going to play out, who knows? I don't know if Bitcoin is going to be it. It definitely has a lot of promise. And so the answer to those who are saying, well, what are you doing? It's a waste of time. It's a waste of energy. It's not green. Why are we wasting? Well, it's like, we're not doing it for free, right? We're mining this Bitcoin. We're a good consumer of energy. We're a flexible load, which is something that gets lost in the shuffle very often. Nobody talks about the fact that we want cheap energy no matter what. And if there's a spike in energy, and if we're participating in ERCOT, for example, which has nodal pricing, which means every piece Texas, of the, right? In Texas, every piece of the grid has a separately identified and price that moves continuously. And so if the price spikes and everybody turns on their air conditioner, we are going to shut down if it's not economical for us to be on the grid. And then we'll participate in demand response services, in resource adequacy services. They call them ancillary services, right? And essentially, ERCOT is interested in maintaining the resiliency of its grid, and they would pay money to make sure that there's always electricity available at reasonable prices. And so if there's the demand that's going out of whack, they will incentivize the load to shut down to the extent they can. And Bitcoin can. We are a flexible load. We're happy to shut down. We can shut down very quickly and essentially to say, hey, we don't want this. We don't want this expensive electricity when everybody has their air conditioner on. We want to be when nobody's on, when there's all this supply and when there's wind is blowing at night, or there's during the middle of the day, let's say there's a lot of solar being produced in Texas and nobody to consume it. And it's sort of very intermittent. We're happy to take it.
Yeah.
And that's
at least
thing that gets
favorite commentary though, which is that it's certainly a good business if you're getting paid to not do something, getting paid to not mine. But I think it also puts a point on a stat that I hear people rolling out sometimes, but it's a little bit misleading about the amount of energy used for cryptocurrency mining, at least in terms of the United States. A number that's been thrown out is that it's something like 3 to 6 million homes electricity consumption is what we're using for cryptocurrency mining right now. But as you've explained, I doubt anyone uses the same amount of electricity at all hours in their home, right?
Correct. So my question to that is, what, right? Meaning, do we think there's utility to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency? If we are of the view, it's a bit of a loaded question. If somebody's of the view that this is a waste of time, energy, and resources, yes, they will use that stat. Or usually what I see, it's a comparison to the country's use. Like you take a country somewhere in Europe and you say, well, Bitcoin mining is using X amount of energy, which is the same as the consumption of energy by a single country. And we say, well, we are not going to make a judgment about the economic uses of something just because we don't like it for whatever reasons, right? And some of these reasons are not really precise and not very well tailored, and it's just you just throw it into the mix. And what I think people miss about crypto mining is it is a flexible load, and there's this thing called the duck curve, right? The electricity used, if you take the 24-hour period or whatever, you start, let's say, 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 a.m., there's a spike. Everybody turns their kettles on, everybody turns their TV on, and it sort of drops, and then the industrial uses sort of spike in the middle and a little bit during the day, and then you have a spike in the evening when people turn the lights on, the lighting, et cetera, right? And so you have this duck curve, and so the grid needs to be able to anticipate these spikes, and usually in the summer you have during the day, the back of this duck is a little bit higher because you have ACs on, et cetera. And so the question is, okay, well, Bitcoin is a load, we are participating, so we're lifting the overall duck curve. But what's getting missed in the shuffle is that we don't want to be in the spikes. We don't want that electricity when it's very expensive, especially if you have nodal pricing and real-time pricing. We don't want that. We will shut down. We will turn off. If there's a break-even point where we say, we can't make any money from this, actually mining right now will lose us money, we will shut down. And what happens, we are investing in the grid, we're consuming energy, we're giving money to the energy producers, and we're consuming the energy usually that other people don't want or desire less. So we're lifting the curve, but we're also smoothing out the spikes, which improves the resiliency of the overall grid. And so then the question is, the grid operators and the energy producers, they need to plan out in advance, and they need to anticipate the use. And I think what is missing is that you can solve the equation in two ways. Either you say, we ban crypto, we don't like this load, or we say, we invest more and more prudently into the grid and generation, and we make sure that whatever supply we have and generation we have on the grid is sufficient to meet the resources and the load needs, right, over time. And that's really hard to do because it's like long-term planning and it's capital-intensive stuff. You need to run RFP cycles, etc. And the green energy mandates mean that the production is becoming very intermittent. The battery technology is not quite there. So what's the answer? Well, actually, intermittent load is actually a partial answer because you can smooth out the intermittent production with the intermittent load, right? And so that's actually an interesting proposition where like people say, well, this is dirty and you just use coal and gas, etc. Well, we use whatever's available in the grid. We'd love to use green electricity if it's available. We'd love to back it up. We'd love to buy RECs or which is sort of the certificates, renewable certificates, confirming that the electricity that we use is green or produced by green generation, etc. Yeah, we're a sustainable company. We don't want dirty energy, but we'll use whatever energy exists.
Right. And this goes right to this intersection of kind of the policy and law as it relates to energy consumption generally, but it's an interesting point in the crypto space. I'm going to give you a fact and then ask a question. It's reported, this is the U.S. Energy Information Administration. They said that Bitcoin mining in the United States, in terms of the share of the world, okay, so we're talking about how much of the Bitcoin mining is happening in the U.S. versus other countries. It went from 3.4% in 2020 to 37.8% in 2022. So in 2 years, a 30+% increase in the share of the world. So at that point, the U.S. has over a third of the world market. How much? We've talked about energy, but there's kind of a looming elephant in the room here, which is the policies of the government. I'm sure a big part of that is the Chinese government's shutdown of Bitcoin miners, right? And so you at Peak Mining, you're a perfect case study because you now have this investment in Paraguay because they have an opportunity. They have cheap green energy. As you look across the world, what does that competition look like and what laws and regulations are most appealing?
Yeah, so it's a twofold answer. 100% the reason for the shift in crypto and Bitcoin mining from China to the US is the Chinese government's ban on crypto mining. In my view, this is the biggest gift that the Chinese government has given to the world and to the United States. Essentially, the US has been able to reclaim leadership in the space, and it's sort of the next natural alternative, right? And from a geopolitical sort of security and policy and foreign policy and for just monetary treasuries policy in the space, right? They love using US dollar as a global policy tool, right? It's currently a global clearing currency, and its supremacy right now is unquestionable and unquestioned. In my personal view, that is going to go. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And then the follow-on question is, what's the alternative? To me, it's some sort of crypto. Bitcoin is a decent enough alternative. There could be better. Nothing sort of has come close to being a sort of substitute.
No, the full question there, because I am curious about one fact that I learned reading into this, which I found really interesting, is about the shift of Ether, right? So moving from proof of work to proof of stake dramatically reduces the energy consumption. Do you think that changes the long-term trajectory of, well, let's just focus on those two for now, Ether versus Bitcoin?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that's going to play out. It's very hard for me to sort of reliably predict the future. I think it's two different views on how the technology should be. There are pros and cons to each. There's also like a network effect, right? It's a lock-in. Why are people using Bitcoin? Because other people are using Bitcoin, et cetera, et cetera. And so the alternative has to be sort of a lot better. And I think Ether is that alternative, but is it that much better or that way beyond any and all expectations as far as what Bitcoin is currently doing, right? And it's not really currently used as a way of transferring value. It's more used as a way of storing and preserving value, right? And so in that case, I don't know how that's going to shake out. But yes, I see what they're trying to do. Now, the downside, remember how I talked about low latency, the requirements for some data center? To mine Ether, you depart from that requirement. That all of a sudden, the downside of not having proof of work is that all of a sudden the data centers have to be slightly different and they have to be more well connected and the latency matters, all these things. So they're trade-offs for everything. But going back to the question about US dollar being the geopolitical tool, the question is, what do you want as an alternative? Strategically, from the United States point of view, what do you want? Is it US digital currency like USDC, sort of stable coin? Is it something else? Or is it Bitcoin? Or are you okay with something decentralized? Or are you risking having something that's in control of another centralized power or government like China or Russia or Brazil or God knows what. And so the answer to me is very straightforward. To me, the answer is, well, you probably want to back Bitcoin as sort of the leading force in this race. And yeah, you're going to lose that ability to prevent people from financing certain things like North Korean weapons sales, Iran, and all these things. But that is the downside of US dollar, because people then realize, and the governments realize, that having your reserves in US dollar is subject to freezing and confiscation by the United States if they don't like what you're doing. So then the natural alternative is it's got to be Bitcoin. And the fact that you're mining it in the United States gives you an enormous advantage, an enormous security advantage, even though it's decentralized, right? And so that's where I came out in this argument. And I think it's the one argument that I haven't seen really discussed a lot. And I think with these sort of global reserve currencies like US dollar, we had Dutch guilders before, we had British pounds before, and when they go very fast, and it's almost like once you hit a point of no return, it goes super fast. And given the political polarization in the United States and how the Treasury and the Fed have been politicized and weaponized in these debates, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And so I think the smart money, medium to long term, is that it's going to go. And one way to express that trade, I think, is you're going to be net long probably some sort of crypto. That's why I think
my view about what the U.S. government probably thinks here, having worked on some sanctions issues and other points within the government on the if or when, as far from now as possible, is probably the U.S. government's view. But at the same time, I think you're exactly right about the strategic advantages of having the mining operations in the United States. And if nothing else, it's a safety valve in case there is a turn. And why not?
Yeah, and I think so. The second prong is, yes, movement from China. U.S. is this amazing, unusual gift, an opportunity that should not be squandered. And then the second part of this question is, well, what are we looking for? And what are some of the location factors for us when we look at the country risk and how we locate our facilities? And the answer to that, it's pretty straightforward, actually. It's more do no harm. We love incentives. We love sales tax breaks that we enjoy as a large data center operator in Texas. So that reduces our cost of energy. We are not necessarily gunning for any state level incentives. What we're gunning for is stability, predictability, as it impacts the energy and just rule of law. And then, like, please do no harm. Like, please do not legislate us out of existence. And you see a lot of rhetoric thrown around where all of a sudden the wave comes back and somebody proposes a crypto ban of some shape or form or another. I think it's very short-sighted.
You're the head of legal at a major crypto mining company operations around the world. Is that what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we think about that all the time, right? We are engaged and have our ear to the ground in terms of the political process at the federal and state level. Biden administration had that extra sort of excise tax on crypto miners' electricity usage. I don't understand the reasoning behind that. Essentially, that would regulate the industry out of existence in the United States with all the knock-on negative consequences. So I don't understand the exact policy reasoning why you would single out that industry. And but you can argue AI data. Sam Altman famously said, look, it costs us $50 to $100 million worth of electricity spent to train ChatGPT version, whatever. Now, is that a good use of money? Is that productive? I mean, yes, it's amazing. It's cutting edge, where all the high school students now can write essays with a click of a button. Wonderful stuff. And of course, it opens up a lot of new other things. But right now, there's no like real use case, and we're still allowing it, right? We're saying, this is an interesting thing. This is an interesting technology. It shows so much promise, right? It's sort of like the way I would compare it to like DARPA and when they come up with the internet, right? It's like, who knew famously invented by Vice President Gore, obviously.
Yeah.
And so nobody knows where that's going to go, how that's going to play out. It's these moonshots, right? Like Manhattan Project. We did one thing, but that resulted in decades of advancement and things like AT&T happening and AT&T Labs, right? Xerox, et cetera, Unix operating system, all came out of that sort of push, sponsored and backed by U.S. government. And then you have the internet, right? And then now you have these things, and you do not, just don't do harm prematurely. Let these things evolve. America is a wonderful country in terms of deep, liquid capital markets, vibrant VC community, money basically backing these bets, hoping to get returns. And I have absolutely no doubt that wonderful things will happen on the AI side of things. I think wonderful things will come from the crypto, coin and mining and all these cryptocurrencies. And I think the sentiment has been turning. Famously, Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan was very much anti-crypto, anti-Bitcoin, said it was all a bunch of policy schemes. I don't understand what this is. This is just ridiculous. What are we doing? This is a waste of time, waste of energy. What are we doing? And now all of a sudden, he's evolved in his thoughts and says, well, they're a very interesting technology, very interesting thinking that went into this, and this is now a something. And when enough people agree that something is a something, all of a sudden reality catches up with perception, and we have this wonderful thing. And I don't believe anybody who can tell you 100% what's going to happen and how that's going to play out technologically, because I don't think anybody really knows. But I do think there's a lot of interesting things that will flow out of this.
I think that's exactly right. And one of the ideas that I've heard recently that's brilliant, and it's even at this intersection, but it proves that the challenge is that law and regulation is trying to keep up with the technology, and it just can't. And so I love that maxim of do no harm. But right now, for example, in the AI space, you're seeing lawsuits about use of IP, artists and et cetera, their IPs being used. But then I heard this idea that was, well, what if you tokenized it, had it on a blockchain such that anytime AI is using a portion of your IP, that will be registered within the blockchain and you'll receive a payment for it. I mean, these are brilliant ideas that solve the problem. But right now, instead, we're having lawsuits in courts about, how to solve it. And probably the do no harm is a good defensive posture. But tell me, maybe as a final word to kind of wrap up this fascinating discussion, like what's exciting for you? What do you see coming next and what are you hopeful for?
I mean, we are just excited about the industry at large. It's awesome to participate in it. I think we're fairly bullish on the space. We're fairly bullish on the industry. I think a lot more is coming. It's a very exciting industry. It's quickly professionalizing. The company itself is becoming better with systems and processes and actually how we're doing things. And we're turning around all the time to be responsive to what the market is doing and how we are operating. We are always looking at scale. We're always looking at growth. We're contemplating how does this company look longer term? How do we maintain that scale? How do we become, our big audacious goal is to become the largest Bitcoin miner in the world. We think that is an attractive proposition to a lot of potential investors, to our stakeholders, to our counterparties, and we like to be a very responsible corporate citizen, right? We're on the ground with real physical infrastructure, with real jobs, with real people building and operating these facilities. And that's how we like it to be, right? Like we don't want to be the Bitcoin miners of yesteryear, where it's these guys who come in and plug in and screw up with the infrastructure, screw up with the grid, and they just are gone. We're not that. These are permanent facilities. We're investing tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into local economies. And it's in the rural economies where these jobs that we're creating, they're real, tangible jobs, and they're changing people's lives, right? And we want to be responsible as well. We want green energy. We want to support the grid because our livelihood is essentially dependent on that, right? Like we can't just slash and burn and kind of destroy the thing that feeds us, right? That's the thing.
That vision, that goal, to go back to your internet analogy, that's how Amazon became Amazon and not pets.com, right?
Right. It's essentially having this big audacious goal, right? They wanted to be like the supermarket of the future, being able to be responsive to people's needs and get stuff in their hands as quickly as possible, right? And that took a lot of years and a lot of determination and a lot of hard work by a lot of people, right? And in the meantime, they built this AWS, Amazon Web Services business, essentially powering the internet, right? Like the number of internet businesses that are running on that is enormous. And a lot of people don't understand the plumbing behind the scenes that needed to happen for that to be a reality. And so we are that, right? We are sort of doing the plumbing that is enabling this beautiful thing, this technology, this mathematically defined thing that's free market and allows people to participate and to preserve and move value seamlessly, right? And like nobody thinks about like you turn on your switch and the light comes on, you turn on the thing and the internet comes on, and I can talk to anybody without any impediments. Well, we are that, right? Except for money, it's the future of money. And I'm very excited about this vision of ours.
That's amazing. And I know that it's no small feat to manage such a growing and impressive effort with operations around the world. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day, Andrey. These insights have been fascinating.
Thank you so much.